The Civic Design Center's mission is to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. Greetings, everyone. I am Tifinie Capehart, and it is my pleasure to serve as the president of the Board of Directors of the Civic Design Center. Today, we come together to celebrate our 20th anniversary, and we are so happy you're here with us. While many of our viewers and supporters have engaged with our organization over the past 20 years, many of you might not know about the critical advocates who spent hundreds of hours over the course of numerous meetings in order to help create the Civic Design Center. We are so excited to premiere today a mini documentary that showcases our founding story, detailing the history and voices of individuals that came together 25 years ago to fight a proposed highway through the middle of downtown, a defining event that was the catalyst for the creation of the Nashville Civic Design Center. This short film explores that story and what transpired at those very first urban design forums during the late 1990s. It's an inspiring legacy that may inspire you about the passion and dedication it takes to lead change in our communities. So joining me in the studio, I have Gary Gaston, the CEO of the Civic Design Center. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, Tifinie. Good to see you. And thank you. It's such a pleasure to be working with you in your role as the president of our board of directors at such a momentous time for our organization, as we reflect on the past 20 years and look forward to what our next 20 years holds for the Civic Design Center and the city of Nashville. I also want to personally thank all of you for joining us virtually here today. Typically, we would celebrate an event like this all together in person, but COVID-19 has made us adapt to so many new realities. And so for this year, we once again decided to come to you in a virtual format. Today, you will hear a message of greetings from our mayor, John Cooper, then watch the documentary film that chronicles the formation of our organization and bring back some of those major players in a panel discussion to reflect on the early years of the Civic Design Center. Next, we'll discuss some of our major accomplishments over the past 20 years, and then we'll look ahead to see and talk about some of the priorities we must make as we push forward into the next 20 years in our city. We have such a great program today, and we're so happy you're here with us. But before we get started, we could not do the work that we do without the generous and diversified support of so many companies, foundations, and individuals. If you contributed to our organization in this past year in any way, I want you to know your support has made a critical impact in allowing us to keep doing the work we do with and for our city. And for our annual sponsors, thank you for your support today. You not only align your companies with our mission, but also deeply support our programs, projects, and the Nashville community as a whole. Our presenting level sponsors this year are Amazon, Global Furniture Group, and Mars Pet Care. We cannot thank you enough for the significant and generous support you make to our organization. Our program level sponsors this year are Core Development, Belmont University O'Moore College of Architecture and Design, the Sandra Shatton Foundation, the University of Tennessee College of Architecture and Design, and Vanderbilt University. Thank you so much for your generous support. And thank you to our many Keystone level sponsors for your continued support. And thank you to all of our additional sponsors. Their logos and names will be featured again later at the end of our program and can be seen on our website at civicdesigncenter.org. And before I hand this back over to Tifinie, I have to say, the Civic Design Center is so fortunate to have an incredibly committed board of directors who generously give their time to supporting this event and our organization all year.
Well, thank you, Gary.
Yes, absolutely.
I also want to recognize our truly spectacular staff members. Our staff works tirelessly to bring our mission to life every single day, and particularly over this past year. Talent, hard work, and passion for all people in Nashville and beyond is what we are lucky to have at the Civic Design Center. We truly are. Thank you all for your time, service, and expertise. And for those of you who are attending that have supported the work of the Design Center throughout our past 20 years to facilitate engagement between the community, its leaders, present ideas for change, and provide programs that create civic action and involvement for people of all ages and backgrounds, we thank you. We are all civic participants, and by donating or getting involved in the Civic Design Center's work, you can help raise the voices of those who may not be at our virtual table with us today. And so we are ready to begin with our program. It is my pleasure to give a very Nashville welcome to our mayor, the Honorable John Cooper.
Good afternoon. It's great to join you virtually, and it'll be even better to see you in person. Now, first, let me recognize some partners and supporters who are key to the center's legacy, and that's 20 years of excellence and counting. Tifinie Capehart, Kim Hawkins, Christine Kreyling, Gary Gaston, and my friend Mayor Bill Purcell. Now, I'm grateful for the opportunity here to talk about how we turn Nashville's momentum into a great, livable, sustainable city. A city that works and works for everybody. Now, more than 89,000 residents have come here since 2010. That's an average of one new resident every hour per day for the past 10 years. But investment is coming here even faster. We're the #1 market in the U.S. for investor demand, and we're adding value here at the rate of 2 times that of the value of Chattanooga every 5 years. Now, our success is also our shared work. We have to figure out how to transform talent, capital, and location into the best live-workplace city in the whole country. And to get there, we need a strong community vision. That's made possible by you. Community vision that made a historic difference already in Nashville 25 years ago. That's when the state proposed to build a highway through the area south of Broadway, and when the center's early founders brought Nashville together to save downtown. So let me start there today, downtown. The center has brought people together again to achieve a community vision for 2nd Avenue, deeply hurt by the Christmas Day bombing last year. Now, Gary and his team are working with Metro 2nd Avenue Recovery Group, and we are reimagining 2nd and 1st Avenue and the West Bank. Now, this renaissance depends on how well we engage everyone who needs a voice in this process together. And let me thank Gary and his team, who've hosted 7 community workshops so far and conducted 2 surveys. More than 500 people have shared their ideas with us at 9 community events. As a result, my latest capital spending plan includes $20 million to get us started on the work to make a great 2nd Avenue. And as we make that investment, it's great to have the Civic Design Center as a trusted community convener and partner. Now, last year, I talked about the opportunity we had at Church Street Park. And now, a year later, more people are using that park, including for concerts and fitness classes, than ever. Now, you all have been champions for green spaces in our city, so let me spend a moment there, our parks. This capital spending plan I just mentioned includes $30 million for our park system. And I'm perhaps most excited about a new city park in one of the last places in Nashville without one. That's Antioch in District 30. We're also opening access to 53 acres of park space in Trinity Hills. And here again, community engagement will drive the vision. All told, our latest investment will increase access to public green space by 60+ acres. But we have 2 more park opportunities I want to talk about down on the riverfront. First, at 88 Hermitage Avenue to purchase a historic site and design a park. And that will set the stage for more development, like a riverfront recreation area, as well as perhaps a mixed-use affordable housing to be adjacent to this new park. Meanwhile, at 1st Avenue and Gate Street, another park will serve a future permanent supportive housing development site with a marvelous amenity adjacent to it. Now, across that river, across the Cumberland, we have a once-in-a-century, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build Nashville's next great neighborhood on the East Bank. Right now, the East Bank is roughly 338 acres of patchwork sites that don't connect to one another or to the Cumberland. Now, what a canvas we have there. 4 well-designed and connected streets, sidewalks and bikeways, plenty of accessible green space, all of the elements of a great community. And our riverfront will become a symbol of Nashville's future. The East Bank will be home to Oracle's new campus, and a pedestrian bridge will connect it to North Nashville. Now, let me conclude today talking about North Nashville and a funding opportunity we have there. As I said earlier, national and international money is coming to Nashville, but so are state and federal dollars potentially. Now, I've identified a federal grant opportunity that could help us take some truly restorative action for North Nashville. And with the community envisioning process, to have a land bridge over I-40, something that was promised to the community back in the 1960s. Now, we are going to need a community plan for what this bridge should look and feel like, and this project can only move forward with the blessings and the design by the North Nashville community. Now, the early work of convening the North Nashville community and asking for their vision is key to that blessing and key to going forward together. And there's just a lot of work in all this, but there's also a lot of opportunity ahead. In achieving that opportunity, I'm grateful to our partners, like the Civic Design Center, as we are creating Nashville's great future together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cooper, for your words of greetings and support. We look forward to working with you and your staff in the coming years. I am so thrilled to be joined today in this studio with our esteemed panel of guest experts. Joining us is former Mayor Bill Purcell. Hello.
Thanks for getting the band back together.
Absolutely. So excited to see you. Kim Hawkins, our founding board president.
I'm really excited to be here with you.
Thank you, Kim. Back with us is Tifinie Capehart, our current board president.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Hello. And our moderator today, Kreyling, who has flown in from California to be with us for this event.
And I'm really, really pleased to be here. I haven't been here since 2019 in the spring, and Nashville has changed so much that it's really been a startling experience, and I'm looking forward to talking about a lot of those changes today. Thanks.
Great. It really is a reunion, so I'm so thankful for all of you to be joining us here today. Before we get started with our panel discussion, we're going to watch that short documentary about the formation of the Civic Design Center that started 25 years ago.
Because of citizens and grassroots, the Design Center exists. But I don't know whether it would have happened without the Franklin Street Corridor. That was such a big topic. It just took off.
Phil Bredesen became mayor in, I think, 91. And he really wanted to do something about downtown. So he decided to build this arena, and he built it right on Broadway. So the planning department and public works department started thinking, oh my God, we have to do something about all this traffic.
So suddenly there was this plan to put a 6-lane highway along Franklin Street, which was a few blocks south of Broadway. When I heard about that, it just intuitively felt wrong. You don't do this into a city. You don't cut off one part of downtown from the south part of downtown. We were pretty appalled about all this.
And I came home, and Ann Roberts had left a 20-minute, I timed this because it's
the longest voicemail ever.
And she had left a 20-minute recording that said,
you have to get back here because you have to write about this.
I started investigating, and of course it looked horrible because essentially they were building a highway. And so the idea was to make a better east-west connector. That's what they said that they were going to do. 7 lanes with a continuous turn lane. But the connection points were the two interstates, the interstate on the east bank and then the one to the west of the Gulch. And so they designed something to build a connection between interstates, and of course it looked like an interstate. Not only are you going to have high-speed traffic on it, but it's going to be too wide for pedestrians to cross with comfort. I mean, a corridor in a building is a place that people go through to get from point A to point B. It's not where they hang out. And so just the use of the term corridor as opposed to street or boulevard indicated the mindset. So yeah, it was pretty horrifying. I finally wrote a big cover story about it in November of 1994. I wrote article after article after article about this stuff.
And some of her articles were provocative.
Didn't make me popular with the executive director of MDHA, for example. It didn't make me popular with the head of the planning department. It didn't make me popular with the head of the public works department.
I was upset that the government was not listening to us. You know, here's the big bad government coming in, going to put a road through our city. Basically, we just didn't like what they were doing and knew there was a better way. So the AIA decided at one of their monthly meetings to have a forum on this. And after that discussion, Christine said,
"We're getting tired of spending all the time on the phone talking about these one-on-one. How can we move this forward beyond this one panel?"
She said, I'm thinking we just put out a notepad and tell people if they want to keep talking about these things, they could sign up.
And then the Urban Design Forum came out of that.
we would have 60 to 70 people every month. We met every month.
Very civic-oriented designers, people from the city, interested community members.
We sat on the most uncomfortable chairs.
Brutal to sit on.
We bought a cooler beer and rolled it in there, and everybody would just, get a beer and drink beer and talk, It was great.
They were remarkable gatherings.
Some were very difficult. I remember one of them, it's sort of a funny story. We had a guy that was talking about the fountain in the park across from the library. Who the hell do you in the design forum think you are? In the long haul, he ended up being very supportive of what we were doing. And that happened quite often.
So it was a very organic organization. It was just grassroots.
It was a very high energy level because we actually thought that we could make a difference. We felt that we knew that there were things that could be done better.
In the music world, you'd say we were riffing. We were riffing, big time.
The corridor was the overwhelmingly most important topic, but it bled off into a lot of other things.
I got another call from a state official. He was mad. He was mad that we were messing with the interstates. That's federal, it's none of your business. Stay off my damn interstates. I remember that so well.
We needed to be having conversation about the built environment in a way that we were not.
What we found is that we didn't really have the appropriate language to argue with them and make our point.
Somebody said, we should have a class. There needs to be an educational piece to all of this.
So we decided to have a class. We decided in 1995 to have a class to get everybody on the same footing.
So they sort of hired me to come over, and I taught a course every Saturday morning. And we talked about urban design and how to make a city a great city. And my goals were actually pretty simple. It was to go back in history and follow how good cities are built.
The Urban Design Forum really was the thing that coalesced a lot of the passion and put it in a very directed way.
So the forum went for about 4 or 5 years. All along, of course, the Franklin Corridor was sort of, we were making our inroads with Franklin Corridor and trying to rethink that. Fortunately, Bill Purcell, who was at the Center for Public Policy, decided he would go to a couple of these things. What's this all about? So he'd show up, and he would come fairly often to these things.
In that process, that charrette process, that constant coming together to think and rethink, I came to realize the importance of both those efforts and ultimately the creation of an organization that would sustain that kind of attention and focus and energy for the long term.
There was always discussion about where we go next. Well, the goal was always to have a design center.
And we felt that if we had an urban design center, there would be a place where you could advocate for doing the right thing before you had to defeat a giant wrong thing.
People don't know what to advocate for if they don't know what's possible. And so I think we needed to help people understand what was possible.
And then when Bill Purcell campaigned for mayor, he campaigned on a promise to not build the Franklin Corridor, but to build a Franklin Boulevard. And he also campaigned on a promise to establish an urban design center.
Well, he got a bunch of support that night from a lot of us that were there. Skipping about 4 years of the forum then, Bill Purcell becomes mayor.
When he was elected, I remember Bredesen called me up and he said, well, now that Purcell's won, you beat it. And at that point, I felt I was on cloud 9 because I felt like,
oh my God, this is going to happen.
I mean, interestingly, the fight over the corridor actually brought attention to the potential that Sobro had.
It was a catalyst. It was something that inspired us to do more than that.
Bill Purcell was very neighborhood oriented, really involved the neighborhoods.
So he comes into office, calls Kim Hawkins and says,
this is what I want you to do. We need to get a design center up and running.
and off we went.
It was really important, I think, to all of us, and to me, at the very forefront, that if we were going to make a design center that really did work for the broader community, then we needed to be able to represent the broader community. And so I think it was imperative that our board and that our structure and that our engagement really included all.
The point in time when it came into its entirety as an organization was the creation of the Plan of Nashville.
On October 7th, 2004, the Nashville Civic Design Center introduced the Plan of Nashville, a comprehensive community-supported vision for Nashville's downtown and surrounding urban neighborhoods. Some 800 Nashvillians participated in the process that created the plan, joining in a series of 47 community workshops and describing in imaginative detail how they wanted their city to look and work in the future.
Plan of Nashville is a 50-year vision for the city. So it was meant to look big picture and long haul at how the built environment of Nashville should evolve. There was a huge community involvement process that took about 2 years.
And so we went through a process of having community meetings after community meetings.
And did workshop after workshop.
We'd get together and we would try to boil down all these thoughts into several, and we ended up with 10.
Local planners, designers, and other volunteers, along with the Nashville Civic Design Center staff, took this communal vision and turned it into the Plan of Nashville and its 10 principles.
The whole idea of Plan of Nashville, I think, goes back to what the Civic Design Center was to be about from the beginning. And that was that people understood what the possibilities were. They understood that they could dream big.
That is really where the design center shines. So when they can show people there's another way to do this. And I've got to say, I mean, of my career of probably a little over 40 years, it's definitely one of the top 5 things that I was ever involved in or close to involved in that I'm very proud of.
I am so proud of the Civic Design Center and where it's gone in the last 20 years.
You look back and you think we did good. And we felt at the time we were having, in addition to being intensely involved, we were having a hell of a lot of fun.
None of us were doing it for credit. We were doing it for the good of the city that we loved.
it's so amazing to see that story told in such a beautiful way. I've heard it from individuals over the past 20 years, but having all the voices come together and the beautiful production of that. I know for a fact there was probably many hours of interviews that went into making that one short video. So I also want to thank our filmmaker, Skylar Huey with Solar Cabin, for piecing that together in such a masterful way. We are joined here back again at the panel discussion. And I'm just going to, if you're joining us for the first time, we have Mayor Bill Purcell here, Christine Kreyling, Tifinie Capehart, and Kim Hawkins. And with that, I am going to toss this over to Christine to get us started.
Thanks, Gary. One thing that's great about now is we were talking heads before in separate rooms, and now we're all together, which makes this especially something to look forward to. Kim, I'd like you to start off. You've alluded a couple of times to the 90s as a special time in terms of planning in Nashville, and Steve talked too about that as a sort of special energy time. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it really was. I would say in the city of Nashville and really across the country. For us, that was a time where the Gulch was being master planned. Bredesen had just come in and was making some pretty exciting additions to downtown with the library and the arena and, a focus really on downtown that Steve alluded to. And then at the same time in the broader country was the advent of the Congress for New Urbanism. So people really starting to think a lot more about the forms of cities, about massing, about alternative transportation, pedestrian friendly. So the idea of form-based code was a new thing. And at the time in Nashville, we had no residential allowed downtown. And there was this energy for people looking at things like the Gulch, the Sobro master plan, of course, the Urban Design Forum that we've all talked about. And there was so much energy and I think intelligence about that, not just from the design community, but the whole community kind of starting to say, well, what does Nashville look like? Or what could Nashville look like? It was a really exciting time to be here.
So, Bill, you talked about in your comment in there about the Design Center came into its entirety with the plan of Nashville. Explain what you meant by that a little bit.
From my way of thinking, the plan was that moment when the folks who had come together back in the 90s to think about not just a forum and a corridor, but a transformational way of thinking about cities. When those people, you, Kim, and all of the others who had been present, basically came together and went out to an entire city and said, this is what we've been thinking, what do you think? And through that process, not only was there a plan produced, but there was a very broad consensus in the larger city about what the core should be, about what the rest of the city should be, the importance of neighborhoods within the whole large city, and the way all of these things were connected and always would be. And so for me, the fact that the Civic Design Center not only was the locus and the parent of this, but more importantly, the protector of this forever, was the transformational time then, and I still think today.
Good. So one thing I think it's important to remind everyone of is that the plan of Nashville focused not just on the central core, but on the adjacent neighborhoods, the first ring neighborhoods, what was typically the streetcar suburbs. And whereas before that, there had been, I think, over 100 plans that had focused just on the central core. But Mark Schmente, who was in the video and who was the design director at the Civic Design Center, he felt that it was important to recognize that the adjacent neighborhoods were sort of like the support structure for the central core, and to use the interstate loop as a sort of defining parameter was the wrong way to look at that, because that obviously wasn't historically even existed when the city was first developed. In your administration, you really focused on neighborhoods and the importance of neighborhoods not as fragments in the city, but as the sort of support structure in a continuous way for downtown. Talk about neighborhoods a bit.
I think, frankly, when you look at this century in Nashville, the big change, and it's throughout the plan, and I think throughout our city today, is that cities, we came to understand that cities are created for people. It's not the things inside the city, but rather the city has got to be responsive to the people and for the people who are there and who will come there. And at the end of the day, it is the neighborhoods in which they live that give them the quality of life that not just attracts them but holds them. So while we had been focusing on streets and buildings in earlier times, when we began to focus on the people who were going to work there, the people who were going to live there, the neighborhoods in which they were going to be, and understood that we had to protect all of that and make it work together, that we, I believe, had a consensus about not just what we needed to do next, but the long-term future of this place.
Interesting. I want to jump in on that because I think it's really important to, as when I first came here, I was jumped in on all these Plan of Nashville meetings, and so I got the chance to go all across the city to every neighborhood group that was participating. And it's so important what you're saying is, and what Kim, you said in the video, is you asked people what their vision was, and you let them talk, and you listened to that, and then it was recorded and reflected in the Plan of Nashville. So there was a real spirit, I think, from the participants that they were being listened to, and nobody was saying, oh, you can't do that, that's a bad idea. This was a vision plan. And when the publication came out and the plan came out, they saw their ideas reflected in a plan that maybe they had never been listened to before or seen something like that. And so I think it just gave that real spirit about what the Design Center's purpose was.
And I also feel like the idea of the neighborhoods was absolutely right, and recognizing that we have all these different neighborhoods around downtown that each have their own unique identity, but maybe for the first time, recognizing that downtown itself was a neighborhood and could be a neighborhood. And that was a big part of, I think, some of the discussion with Plan of Nashville. And as all of those discussions happened, what would it take for downtown to actually be a neighborhood that you wanted to live in? Because that really, you had said before, Mayor, it was, 900 people lived in downtown when you took office?
I mean, that we had been more successful, I think, than any city in America in moving people out of our downtown. We knew at an earlier time that the problem with cities was people, and if you could get the people out, that the city would thrive. This was the worst idea Nashville ever had, but we were very successful at it. And so we were down to 900, a few more than 900 people in the core at the beginning of this century.
Right.
And you're right, once we began thinking about this as the neighborhood we all share, we remembered that people need to live there, people need to work there, people need to come together there, people need to celebrate there. And that, I think, transformed our thinking about the planning, and that's reflected certainly in the Plan of Nashville.
So I'm going to read a little quote from Jane Jacobs, who had brilliant ideas about really how to keep urban areas alive back in 1961 with The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and this has got to do with the downtown as the heartbeat of the region. Probably everyone is aware of certain general dependencies by a city on its heart. When a city heart stagnates or disintegrates, this is Nashville in 1970s and 80s, a city as the social neighborhood of the whole begins to suffer. People who ought to get together by means of central activities that are failing, fail to get together. Ideas and money that ought to meet and do so often by happenstance in a place of central vitality fail to meet. The networks of city public life develop gaps they cannot afford. Without a strong and inclusive central heart, a city tends to become a collection of interests isolated from one another. It falters at producing something greater socially, culturally, and economically than the sum of its separated parts. And that's what Gary's talking about, and we're all talking about, is knitting this all together so that downtown and the surrounding territory can be greater than the sum of its parts. So one thing that I think is important, and Kim and Bill have already alluded to this, is the big projects that were happening or were in the pipeline or were in the minds of mayors and civic officials and people in neighborhoods and things. And we've talked about the arena, the public library, the Frist Center, the Country Music Hall of Fame, the public square, Rolling Mill Hill, the Gulch. All these things sort of gave impetus to the plan of Nashville and to the Urban Design Forum and the Urban Design classes. It gave a sense of urgency that we had something to live up to, that we wanted to be able to direct how these projects played out so that they had their maximum positive impact. But in addition to that, and Gary, I think, has particularly alluded to the process, the grassroots process that produced the Plan of Nashville with over 800 people. I think it's significant in the book that the end papers in the Plan of Nashville are the names of all the participants. We wanted everybody recognized in the book itself as a participant, and that's how we did that. But do you think, I don't live here anymore, is the grassroots process as opposed to top-down, is that still happening in the city, or does it sort of ebb and flow, or what's the status of that?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think it's evident. I'm going to hats off to Tifinie because she's been had been really involved in Nashville Next. But that process was another, I think, tremendous process of talking about community involvement at a grassroots level all the way through. And I think there have been several other studies that have involved literally thousands of Nashvillians kind of offering their voice. But I can't say that it happens every time. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about Nashville Next, because it was a monumentous effort.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you to you all for the work that you did to create the Civic Design Center and the Plan of Nashville. All the projects that you named, I can't not imagine Nashville without those things, right. Without the library and the Frist and the Country Music Hall of Fame. And so to know that all of that came out of like a truly grassroots effort is astonishing. So I really thank you guys. I think we need another Plan of Nashville, or at least another listening session for the Plan of Nashville, because I do feel like we've lost some of that grassroots involvement, to be honest.
Is that because, pardon me for interrupting, is that partly because there's so much happening that it becomes overwhelming to the city services that are trying to manage?
Well, I think it's almost like, I think from a engagement standpoint, we almost need a reset, because we started, out of this process kind of came the idea of engaging neighborhoods and really creating neighborhood identity. And because we've had, so much growth in Nashville and so many people from other places and other cities, it's kind of like they're landing here because Nashville is great and wonderful, but I don't know if they really understand the soul of Nashville and what that was. So almost as if we kind of need to remind people that there is a Plan of Nashville and there are some ideas and vision, and to kind of get everybody on a reset to say, we don't want to lose that as we continue to grow, right?
It may be just bringing it back to ourselves.
Exactly.
Because in some ways it's gone. And what's really funny is I remember doing Plan of Nashville. I remember as we were creating the design center, the whole idea of we were thinking things are happening really quickly. 20 years ago, we were thinking things were happening really quickly. Yeah. And so decisions were being made for us as opposed to us, the citizenry, kind of making decisions. So go 20 years ahead, and if it was fast then, I can't imagine what the speed would be today.
Well, it's a different situation of the problems that we had 20 years ago. We couldn't have, they're completely different now. So now it's the challenges of our successes are our problems.
That's right.
But what Tifinie says is exactly right on the critical nature of continuing to require the participation of people in their city. That's where we were 20 plus years ago. People didn't feel connected. Neighborhoods were not organized. Their positions of those individuals were not always respected. And you will remember being lost missionaries out there at Vanderbilt University when they were not listening or paying attention to the voices of people, and the forces continue to move on. I in my heart, believe that's why there is a Civic Design Center. Leaders change. People become transfixed by the new thing or the next thing, or believe somehow that the world is different. But the people who live there know what they need and what they want and what ought to happen for their children and their grandchildren. I think the Civic Design Center is the critical, continuous force to push us back to that notion, to participate and engage the whole city. Absent that, the issues of equity, the issues of gentrification, the issues of division, the issues ultimately of failure can return to the equation even as we're celebrating all of our success.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that the Plan of Nashville was good in articulating was that we weren't, even though obviously a street that's lined with trees is better looking than a street that doesn't have any trees on it, but the impetus was how the city worked, how it functioned, as opposed to how it looked. And that, I think, is something, the city looks totally different than it did when
last time you were here.
Right. I mean, Gary's been, we were up on the rooftop the other day on the W Hotel, and he was pointing out all the new buildings. I had no idea what their names even were anymore. So things have really changed a lot, and it's especially dramatic for me to perceive that. But so downtown is not stagnant now. There were a couple of themes that came out of, prominent themes that came out of the Plan of Nashville, and before we talk in general about the downtown, the focus on the Cumberland River was a key theme of the Plan of Nashville, and as was the idea of interstates as agents of fracture in the physical and social fabric of the city. Let's talk about the riverfront first, because I know Kim and Bill have, I mean, you guys have been talking about the riverfront since before the plan even came out.
Right.
That was a big focus. So,
Well, I want to just give props to Bill, because 1 year to the day, I remember, after the Plan of Nashville was unveiled, was our next year's event. And on that day, you announced that you were wanting to start this riverfront redevelopment master planning process. And you put the Civic Design Center as a major partner in helping lead that public participation portion. So,
I mean, well, you had to be there because we were changing the way we thought about it. Nashville wasn't alone in looking away from its city. It was the place we put our sewage. It was the place that we floated away our garbage. It's why ultimately people had moved out of the core of not just this city, but cities from New York to California. But if we were going to change that, we had to not only change our focus, but then frankly, we had to change the environment. We had to close the thermal plant. We needed to make sure that our sewage was not any longer driving people away from the very place we wanted them to be. And we needed to give them the encouragement that only the Civic Design Center in this planning process could provide, that there would be a green, lovely, inviting future back on the river as there was the day that, frankly, people got off the boats and said, this is the place.
And one of your very first efforts as mayor is you took a project to the Mayor's Institute for City Design, and it was Rolling Mill Hill. And so that may be hard for people to think about, that was only 20 years ago that was brought. That Rolling Mill Hill and the river had started being looked at a little bit, thought about a little bit. We were thinking about the Cumberland as the invisible river, and Rolling Mill Hill was one of those first ways to start to bring it back. So I think the initiative that you took then and then continued with the riverfront master plans and kind of start continuing to look at how do we face the river again. It's a big element of Plan of Nashville, talking about we've spent 200 years going away from the river. Let's start coming back to it. And
okay, so before we talk about the vision for the river, let's talk about Rolling Mill Hill and what it was like when you took it as a problem, I suppose, or something that required solving or planning at very least, to the Mayor's Institute on urban design. What was it like then?
Well, frankly, it was, first of all, it was a natural thing for me to do, having been informed by y'all in those early days in the forum about the importance of architecture, planning, thinking, dreaming. So when the Mayor's Institute invited me as one of a handful of new mayors to come and think about it, they told me to bring a project, and I brought the 15 acres of Rolling Mill Hill. And the reason was simple. These were derelict buildings. It was a graveyard for buses. It was a graveyard for destroyed fire trucks. Speaking of that, the only really successful business going on up on that hill at that time was the morgue, which was operating 7 days a week, but that was it. We also washed police cars up there using sheriff's inmates. That's all that was occurring on that space. 15 acres sitting on the edge of downtown with the best, frankly, physical location imaginable. And what those architects, using the mind now trained by you all and Sebe and others, said was, it's about people. You need to get people. You've got things and projects, those are good. Football stadium across the river, good. But now we need to think about how we bring people into the core and give them those things, yes, trees and streetscapes and all that, but the important stuff, but the only thing that makes them relevant or ultimately successful is if there's people. And so we need to focus on housing. We need to not just focus on market rate housing, we need to focus on affordable housing. So in that process, we began thinking in a very focused way about those things all coming together. And that was people of all kinds living together in a place that's in connection to our city and connection to the things that will come.
So, okay, we're in the 21st century now, and downtown is certainly not stagnant, and neither are the first-ring neighborhoods. But where are these places now when we compare them with the plan of Nashville and the citizens? What do the citizens think about? I mean, I've talked to some people, and there's a certain amount of ambiguity about where downtown and the first-ring neighborhoods are now. There's great successes, but there's some stuff that some people at least don't like so much or are a little bit afraid about. Is this sort of out of control or something? Talk about this now. What's scaring people? What are people concerned about? What are people rejoicing about? There's greater housing density and people on the street and all that kind of stuff, but there's also the party vehicles that have had to be reined in and stuff like that. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So you guys fill me in on this because you live here and I don't anymore.
Well, I'll say I think some people are afraid of Nashville losing its soul. You know, if we talk about, you know, like I think Exit In and, you know, in some of the music venues, and one of my favorite late night cafes, the Hermitage Cafe, is closed because that site's going to be redeveloped. So it's little things like that I think people are kind of afraid of. Is Nashville losing, you know, its soul, the thing that made it Nashville? And then also I think people are concerned about being, I'm going to use what I've always heard is kind of being left behind, you know, like folks who have lived in Nashville all of their life, and just kind of getting left behind in all the bright and shiny and new, which that's great. But I think we need to think about, you know, how do we keep Nashville's soul? How do we keep, you know, these neighborhoods intact? And how do we keep people, again, engaged in the process?
And I'll add to that a little bit. But in 2010, as the Music City Center opened and all of that, there was this huge influx of hotel, you know, more of the tourism.
That's the next.
And so in the Sobro Master Plan in 2013, there was a lot of conversation about that. And we actually had, believe it or not, we were below the number of hotel rooms that we needed. And I think that has since gone way on, well, some people might say we still don't have what we need, but there was a huge influx of hotel rooms, which really brought with it the tourism, which was part of Music City Center's success. And I think we just have to continue to get back to that question: is what makes downtown a great neighborhood? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily the same thing that makes Nashville a great place for tourism. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do is find that balance. We've also since brought in another 15,000 residents. Although that gets to the question, are those really permanent residents?
Okay, talk about that a little bit, because there's a lot of short-term residential stuff moving in, which has inflated property values and also residential costs. But
and at one point, as those hotel rooms were being built, they were filling the gap that we had. But now those hotel rooms have come on, and we continue to have huge numbers of short-term rental properties within our downtown, which, I mean, perhaps when you don't have those permanent residents, if you live somewhere and it belongs to you in a way, you become a steward of that place. And when that doesn't happen, you tend to not have that same relationship, if you will, to the city. And so I do think STRPs have made a tremendous increase in some of our rental values and maybe made it more affordable, because if they're able to be leased out at a rate of a couple $100s a night, it really changes the dynamic of our housing and affordable housing. And that may not just be for downtown, that may be for those first ring neighborhoods as well.
Yeah.
I mean, every city in the country is struggling with this investment and what does it mean and who will it bring. What we did and what this plan emphasized from the beginning is that we had to have housing where everyone in the city could live, everyone's children could live, their grandchildren could live, where there'd be an opportunity for them all. It is very important that we remain a place that attracts tourists, although we do have to be careful. We already have one zoo, we don't need two. So the downtown needs to be a place where people feel comfortable coming and being and living, and that's the core of what I think the plan and we're talking about here now. 15,000 people in the downtown where there were 900. On our way to 30,000, I think we're in agreement about that. If those are all Nashville people and people who care about Nashville in that core, they're going to take care of this. They're going to insist that their government make this a place where they can live and work and play and raise a family. If, on the other hand, these are short-term rentals or simply investment vehicles, high-end, not for people that can live and work in the place that they call home, then you have a different result. And you see this threat in cities across America, and the plan keeps us, I think, anchored in the notion it shouldn't happen here.
I mean, it's obvious if you read through the plan of Nashville and you look at Sobro today, for example, the vision in the book is different from what has happened. The vision was a mid-rise residential quarter of the downtown. This is before we ever even thought about vacation rentals in downtown, because we didn't have any residential at all in downtown.
Right.
But I think now it's high-rise and lots of hotels for tourism. That's probably inevitable with the coming of the Music City Center, but I do think there's a certain anxiety about what happens to Sobro if it just becomes a tourist district and you get into the idea of affordable living, and which is your phrase, Kim, affordable living, not just affordable housing. Talk about affordable living as opposed to affordable housing. What do you mean?
Because I think affordable living takes you out of that mindset of just the house. It's the idea of what's my transit, how do I get to places, what resources do I have in that place? Can I get to my school? Can I get to my grocery? Can I get to my work? Can I get to all of the services that I need? And so affordable living, I think, is a much more apt description.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously we're still talking about this stuff, and because it needs to be talked about. Now we want to shift to a short video in connection with a focus that the Design Center didn't have with the plan of Nashville, but a real regional focus that has to do with transportation and health and shaping the healthy community, two publications that the Design Center put forward in the 21st century.
Moving Tennessee Forward was a very exciting project for me personally, but also for the organization. It really let us enter that realm with working with city government, federal government, state government, and started to take what was in the plan of Nashville a step further. And you're starting to kind of detail some of those pieces, like capping the interstate or bridge designs and transit-oriented development that grew our relationship with UT College of Architecture. We had students come in with TK Davis that studied different sites around Nashville looking at TODs and transit-ready developments that were all part of this publication. So it was also an opportunity for us to look a little bit outside of Nashville and see the importance of us as a region and as a state. we started doing the work on Shaping Healthy Communities, which is a publication, but it's also all these initiatives that continue beyond the publication.
For those of us who were inside the Metro Nashville Planning Department, I think a lot of the forums and classes that the Civic Design Center provided were really formative for all of us. It's been really rewarding and interesting to think about how can public health get involved essentially in the built environment. This is not a space that public health has traditionally been in. So the Shaping Healthy Community book, to me, was such an important part of the journey for the Nashville Civic Design Center. This was an opportunity to help decision makers think more holistically about the decisions they're making and how those decisions impact quality of life. So particularly for our health departments, we wanted our buildings to be as healthy as the services that we were providing in those buildings. And could we think differently about a public health department? And I think that really unfolded a series of events that helped the Nashville government in particular broaden its horizons.
Okay, so that shows the Design Center pulling back, looking an even bigger picture than the plan of Nashville, because that's a whole regional thing. Shaping the healthy community, and as well the transportation plan that you worked on with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and those are key government partnerships that you've capitalized on. Talk about that, son.
I think those two publications are a really good framing of the growth of the organization and the maturity in its, over the course of our last 10 years or so. It moved outside, it built upon the plan of Nashville, particularly the first one, the Moving Tennessee Forward, was all about transportation and land use. It took us outside the scope of Nashville to looking at the region and partnering with the Tennessee Department of Transportation and our local MPO, our Metro Planning Organization, which does all of the transportation planning for the region. So those organizations started to look to us as experts and the value in working with the Civic Design Center to think really big about the future and what we could bring to the conversation and engage with the public. And I think it opened a lot of eyes to the need for transportation-focused work, and not just thinking as transportation as cars and not talking about the land use that went around it and went with it. So, and then Shaping Healthy Communities, which you and I went through together. We've been through a lot.
Me with the slow internet connection in California trying to edit this, and it took like a day for him to get my emails. Another,
I think, groundbreaking study and research project that took us in Nashville to the suburbs and the rural areas for the first time. We looked at the entire city and the county as a whole, but thought of it on a national level. Like Nashville was a model that cities across the country could follow if they're trying to create a truly healthy community.
Okay, Kim, you guys have worked a lot, thought about transportation issues and stuff. How is Nashville doing transportation-wise? Tiffany, you want to pick that up? Who wants to?
I'll say there's been a lot of stops and starts. Maybe
no pun intended.
I think that's fair. So I think that we have had several initiatives, lots and lots of study. I don't think for any of us here we would say we're where we need to be. We have a long way to go. But perhaps some of this building density along our corridors, again, whether that came from Plan of Nashville or later on in 2015 with Nashville Next and the concentration of our densities to try and at least allow us to be transit ready, I think is really important. I think our greenway systems and the ways that they connect to actually provide people alternative transportation methods, whether from a pedestrian or cycling standpoint, are really important, but we are not there yet.
We're not. And I will chime in to mention Nashville Next. I mean, Nashville Next was a very broad community engagement process, and we
defined what Nashville Next is, yet Maybe.
Not yet. So
Okay,
I will. So
do that,
Nashville
yeah.
Next is Nashville's comprehensive plan, and it was adopted in 2015.
June of 15.
Thank you. Yeah. So 2015. I had my daughter then, so I have mommy brain from that time. But it really outlined a broad vision for transportation, and then when it came time to have the rubber meet the road, pun intended. That didn't. It just didn't happen. And so, but that vision is there. It's ready to be implemented, and I think that's where I come back to say, I think getting back to that core of, residents, old and new, we really need you to remain engaged in the Civic Design Center. To help implement some of these
And it's a huge
ideas to get us
part-
there.
A huge part of social equity too.
Yes.
To mean that people can live in various places and have transportation
Yes.
that provides for them to be able to access what all of
Exactly.
their needs are. But again, I do think we're building towards that. Everything about the plan of Nashville and Nashville Next builds us toward that so that we will be ready for transit when we can get it to happen.
I think the density that we're building in our city, it's going to at some point require that we do something. We've had the option of kind of thinking about it, discussing it, but with development coming, we're going to have to do something about
And
it.
there's so many cities that have tried to do this and they fail the first time, and then in the years that it takes for the next go around, traffic has just increased so much that everyone's like stuck in traffic, and they're like, oh, I wish I'd voted for that last time.
I think it's
because
usually third time,
Third
and I
time.
think the next one for us will be
the
our third time.
So,
Okay, another key component of the Design Center is education. And there's been a particular focus on youth education in terms of the Design Center's outreach. And we have a short video to show what's been happening there.
Doing more and doing it better. That's something that I love. Being able to communicate more with children's groups, kids groups with the Design Your Neighborhood program. I'm so proud of how that project started and how it's grown over the years. That was one of the first times I saw like the light bulb go off for people who have no idea of what design or architecture or any of that is and why it matters until you go out and bring them out into a community and say, this neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks, or this neighborhood is missing these things. Wouldn't it be nice to have those things in all parts of the city? Getting people out to have a constructive conversation about how we build and shape our communities is very important. The Civic Design Center, in a way, is a convener to be able to have those conversations.
I think a lot of people, they want to see change happen, but they don't know where to start. Doing small interventions, it gets people excited about making positive change in their community. And it's just one more tool in the Design Center's belt that allows them to get into the neighborhood and have those conversations early on. Before we came up with the name Tactical Urbanism Organizers, or TURBO, there wasn't a whole lot of activism in urban design. They're really great methods because it's experimental and you're introducing something new without permanent change. So having a group like Turbo allowed us to have that physical activism with that community support and having their ideas as part of it.
Okay, so Gary, we just saw a short video on the youth education program that's part of the Design Center. You also teach a class in Socially Conscious Design 101. Talk about that. Kim was talking about the social equity issue, which is obviously another sort of term for that. Just go into that a little bit.
Well, I mean, given the history of the organization, the Urban Design Forum, I think education has always been something that we want to do and continue doing. And Design Your Neighborhood was envisioned to just like Stephanie said in the video, you see the spark that goes off in these children and kids' eyes when you ask them what they'd like to see happen in their communities, and you give them the tools to respond to that and to come up with their own ideas for it. So it's a pretty basic concept, but it's what we've seen, the success of it is so amazing. And some of the images in that video where we actually work with the youth who design some of these interventions and go out and they do it themselves through our tactical urbanism program called Turbo. So it's not just adults. There are adults who are engaging in that, certainly in their communities. But also the youth are now getting involved in it. And Design Your Neighborhood is currently in 7th and 8th grade middle schools all across the county. And our goal is to get that into every single school, to engage students to have a voice in their communities and let them take that into the future with them. And hopefully, potentially along the way, can help. Maybe they want to go into design or to development or to planning, which we know needs more diversity in all of those professions. And then the socially conscious design is it's a rebooting of our original urban design forum, an urban design class, but with the intentional incorporation of all these issues we've been talking about, socially conscious practices that always speak to equity, include people that have been excluded from the conversation, identify problems that are still ongoing in our cities, and try to work with communities so that their voice can be reflected and improve those conditions for all. So the cities truly are for all and not just for the wealthy or for one segment or the other.
You're a big history buff, I know, and in terms of just looking at neighborhoods, which was a big focus of yours, talk about social equity, and because historically some neighborhoods made out better than others in Nashville.
No, look, what Gary is saying and what the Design Center has been doing in terms of education is at the core of the answer to your question. Education is the most important thing a city does, always was, even when we didn't know it, always will be, and we know it now. And the education on these issues has to take place. And frankly, the Design Center is going to be, I think, a critical ongoing component, if not, again, the conscience of a community that says we have to focus on not just where we are and where we want to be, but where we've been. One of the things the plan did so well is remind us that we are very much a product of our own past and of our own long distant past, and you begin right there at the beginning of this city, but also truthfully of our recent past. If you understand that past and the failures as well as the opportunities that are in front of us right now, only through education, only through a shared understanding of those things are we going to protect against the division, frankly, the driving of people from our city, the inability of people to join us in our city, and ultimately to share in the blessings of the city, which is the recipe for the failure of the city. And we know that because we have seen it happen here and other places.
One thing I think that's a great symbol that happened during your administration of a recognition how you can design not just for social equity among individuals, but as a symbol of recognizing the importance of social consciousness and equity, was the restoration of the public square that had been turned into a parking lot. And we've talked about this before about why that was symbolically so important.
Well, the public square in the history of the world was the place where you gather, the place where people come together, whether it's to celebrate or to protest or simply to acknowledge each other's connection to the place. And we had taken that as we were consciously moving people away from our core. And so in this case, we replaced the public square with public parking, which was mostly cars and magnolia trees and whatever birds were attracted to magnolia trees, and I love birds, but it was not a great combination out there in front of the courthouse. We took that away. We restored with a green roof, but you're right. It was the symbol of what that meant, that there have to be places for people to gather in their neighborhoods, the shared neighborhood of downtown, their own neighborhoods, and it has to be, frankly, a place where everybody wants to gather and be together, so that they celebrate not only their own victories, but the success of the city as a whole. Something we didn't always do and most places didn't. It's at the core of the plan of Nashville. It's not about my neighborhood succeeding and yours failing. It's not about me having safety where I am. I don't care about you. The whole place has to be successful. And ultimately, when it is, then we do all rise.
And I'm just going to add that I think one of the great successes of Public Square for me is that everything I can think of since it opened in 2006, all of the women's marches, all of the great marches that we've had for racial inequity have all been at Public Square. And to me, that is, that's the great success of it, is that people automatically, intuitively know where to go because that was created.
Which may or may not be the reason that it was done away with initially. But that said, it's here, it's part of who we are. And again, as long as we remember that past, we won't repeat it. We will hopefully do the right things going forward.
Well, and civil rights and all of that, that's a part of Nashville's history. So it has to be there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're just about to wrap this up. What do you want to, Gary, you want to take this part, or what do you want to do here?
Final thoughts from...
Can I just say that what the Civic Design Center has accomplished over the last 20 years is by far more than I could have ever imagined 22 years ago in a conversation with you, Bill Purcell, when you said, hey, can you go ahead and make this happen? This has exceeded all of my expectations.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to finish up last because I think...
Yeah, she's our future.
Well, I would, again, thank all those who brought a young neighborhood person from East Nashville into the fold, showed me what I needed to know, and ultimately helped me have a vision that informs at least a significant portion of my time as mayor. Here's what I know for sure. We always needed a Civic Design Center, even when we didn't know it. We will always need a Civic Design Center, and we know that. There will be all kinds of changes and things that happen in the years ahead, and leaders will come and leaders will go, sometimes quicker than we ever imagined possible. But if there is a Civic Design Center that holds their past, their present, and their future in their hands, knowing, as we've said here tonight, that it's about people and making it a place for all people, then we'll be okay. And that's the challenge, but it's also, thankfully, the dream that this design center and everyone who's a part of it gives us hope for.
Well, it's obvious to me that what's happened in this panel today is that there's still plenty to talk about in terms of Nashville and the built environment and the social environment and how those two work together. And that the Civic Design Center is the town hall for the conversation. So congratulations, Civic Design Center, on 20 years, and keep going in the future. Thank you.
Again, I have to say thank you to all of you for your dedication. Listening to all the stories and the history, I know that if you all had not stepped up and stepped into these roles, that Nashville would not be where it is today. And so, and to have a organization that has lasted 20 years is a really awesome accomplishment. So thank you. And thank you for creating a Nashville that, you know, I fell in love with, and when I came here in 1999 for college and stayed, and now have made it my home. And so I hope that we can now share that love with other folks who have come here, not just to invest in a house or real estate, but to really invest in Nashville as a city. And so thank you and congratulations.
Yes, I thank you all so much. This was just a joy to be a part of, and I agree. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to Nashville and never, you know, it's the same story. You didn't think you'd stay here, and you fell in love with the city, and you've been here, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So it's a joy to work in this job and be a part of such an amazing organization. So I want to thank all of our panelists today, and just closing remarks, the past 18 months has not been easy for anyone. We know that. At last year's annual luncheon, we did have time to reflect on the events of 2020 that have fundamentally changed our lives. But one major event had not yet happened. The Christmas Day explosion on 2nd Avenue, which occurred just a block from our office. Because of the damage we sustained, our staff still has not been able to return to work together in our space, but we are hopeful to do so in the next month as our renovations are finally completed. And while the explosion did cause a lot of destruction in our historic 2nd Avenue corridor, it also opened new opportunities to not only restore the street, but to reimagine it in ways that we could not possibly have achieved before. And as you heard from Mayor Cooper, the Civic Design Center has been working very closely with the city, with Kim, with GHP, with many organizations to envision a new district that will be a shining example of public space we can all be proud of for generations to come. And you heard about the Socially Conscious Design 101 course. This is something that we're offering every fall and spring. We just finished a cohort this past fall. And if you're interested in participating in that, we want to encourage you as a neighborhood member or as somebody in a firm, whatever background you have, please contact us and sign up and find out about ways to become more of an activist in shaping the future direction of our city. And one final exciting parting note is we talked a lot about the 10 principles of the Plan of Nashville. So in celebrating our 20th year anniversary and looking ahead to the next 20 years, we are so excited to actually be unveiling our new 12 guiding principles for civic design to you all in the coming week, next week. This built upon the 10 principles, but also recognized that a few situations didn't really exist in the city 20 years ago or 15 years ago that do now. And clearly, like affordable housing is so much more of an issue. It wasn't really the same situation when the original 10 principles came out. So we see these new guiding 12 principles as addressing those and also moving forward as not only being a model for us here in Nashville, but for communities all across the country, large and small. These principles will guide our work for the next 20 years in our mission to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. So if you felt inspired by today's origin story and panel discussion, we encourage you to take the step to be involved as an advocate in your community. Sign up for our newsletters and follow our social media, attend urban design forums and our civic advocates meetings, volunteer for our Design Your Neighborhood program, our Tactical Urbanism Turbo program, and we know that there will be a lot more of these opportunities to be engaged again in 2022. And many of you probably came to this event today because of your company's sponsorship. But as you know, our origin was all about individual involvement. So we ask that you do what you can do to make a difference. Please become an individual member and support the Civic Design Center as a monthly donor. This form of personal giving is an easy and great way to help sustain our organization. Again, thanks to all of our panelists and our guests, to Christine Kreyling coming from California to be here with us, Bill, Tifinie, Kim, it's a pleasure, to Mayor Cooper for your remarks. And as we close, panelists, I know Kim already did. If anybody else wants to just say a congratulations to 20 years to the design.
Sure. 20 years is great. 20 years is incredible. I'm counting on 200 more.
Congrats, Civic Design Center. We love you.
Well done. Well done.
And let's just keep going.
Great. We look forward to seeing you all again in person very soon. Thank you for your support. Congratulations, Civic Design Center, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.
Hey.